The history of the United States has always had its share of notorious outlaws. In this video, I'm going to give my top 4 American outlaws. Outlaws are defined in many ways. I will not be covering mafia outlaws, white-collar outlaws, or serial killers. The men and women on this list are all from 2 distinct eras of American history, the late post-Civil War period and the 1930s eras of American crime. My criteria for this list is based not on their crimes per se, but their cultural impact and notoriety. These are just my opinions. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I will be discussing why they're infamous, while also giving a brief overview of their most notorious actions. So without further ado, number 4, Bonnie and Clyde. During the Great Depression, one couple terrorized rural towns throughout Iowa, Texas, Minnesota, Illinois, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Indiana over a 2-year period. I included both on this list because they are a package deal. From what is understood, Bonnie and Clyde had a tumultuous romance, which added to their mystique. Their main targets were small-town rural banks, stores, and even funeral parlors, along with any lawman who got in their way. One theme that has set this era of gangsters apart is that many of them were heavily armed. So heavily armed, in fact, that local police and sheriff were completely outgunned most of the time. Bonnie and Clyde were not so different from the other gangsters of this time period. In order to acquire their massive arsenal, they would hit National Guard armories. In one raid, for instance, they took 4 Browning automatic rifles, aka BARs, and several Colt M1911 45 caliber pistols. The most famous photos of Bonnie and Clyde feature these weapons. These photos have further enhanced the legend of the two. Bonnie and Clyde were both relatively small and very young and reckless. Bonnie is said to have barely weighed 100 pounds, while Clyde was slight as well. But when armed with a BAR and shotguns, they make an imposing team. Their motive was to not become famous. According to one writer, John Neal Phillips, Clyde Barrow wanted revenge against the Texas prison system. Clyde claimed he was abused in many ways while incarcerated. One fellow inmate, Ralph Foltz, said Clyde, quote, changed from a schoolboy to a rattlesnake while in prison. Between April 1932 and April 1934, they shot down 12 law enforcement members in Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Missouri. Their run was coming to an end by the end of May 1934. At this time, Clyde had an astounding 16 warrants in 4 states, ranging from robbery to murder. It was becoming clear that Bonnie and Clyde would not be taken alive. At this time as well, police and the FBI were becoming more and more sophisticated in catching up with these violent gangs. Public sentiment was swiftly changing as well. Many of these criminals that had been robbing banks and being seen as Robin Hood figures were now seen as nothing more than vicious killers. As the bodies started piling up, Bonnie and Clyde were now squarely in the sights of law enforcement. Authorities received a tip that the two would be in the area around Shreveport, Louisiana, around May 23rd to visit a friend. On May 23rd, Bonnie and Clyde's V8 came rolling down Louisiana State Highway 154. A posse of 6 men was waiting. As soon as the car came into view, the posse lit up the vehicle, riddling it with over 130 rounds. Bonnie and Clyde's reign of terror was ended on that highway. Bonnie and Clyde are on this list mostly because of their cultural significance. It speaks to a deranged romanticism that sits at the heart of any dark drama or dark comedy. Several movies have been made about their exploits, including the extraordinary film Bonnie and Clyde from 1967, starring Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway. This film in particular romanticized their relationship and created the aura that the two were a cunning pair of criminals that outsmarted law enforcement at any turn. However, it appears from a historical perspective that the two were just chaotic and unhinged with no real plan. Number 3, Billy the Kid. Billy the Kid is another one of those outlaws that had an extremely short but violent run as one of the most notorious outlaws in American history. Billy the Kid was his nickname. His real name was Henry McCarty. McCarty was born in New York City in 1859. McCarty's childhood was chaotic. His father died when he was young. Therefore, his mother moved them further and further west. By 1874, his mother had died, leaving McCarty and his siblings orphans. With little to do, the 14-year-old began committing petty crimes. After escaping jail and stealing 2 pistols from his stepfather, he ended up in Arizona, milling around as a ranch hand and a gambler. Around this time, he began to call himself William H. Bonney, or Billy for short. He was known to have a charismatic personality. He killed his first man in a saloon in Bonita, Arizona. After a shouting match, Billy the Kid and Francis Cahill came to blows. After being knocked to the floor, the Kid wrestled his revolver out and mortally wounded Cahill. Witnesses said that Billy was exercising self-defense. One witness stated, "Billy had no choice. He had to use his equalizer." Nevertheless, he was arrested shortly after. He would escape from jail, which would be a theme throughout his life. After the murder of Billy's friend and employer John Tunstall, who was a wealthy cattleman who encroached into the business territory of banking and cattle magnates Lawrence Murphy and James Dolan. This touched off what would become known as the Lincoln County War. Billy joined a group of men pulled together by one of Tunstall's ranch foremen called the Regulators. This group was hell-bent on revenge. Billy the Kid respected Tunstall highly and wanted to scorch the earth for his killers. The ensuing rolling gunfight saw Billy and the Regulators murder sheriffs and several prisoners. By the end of the conflict, 19 people were killed. President Rutherford B. Hayes removed the territorial governor of New Mexico and almost declared martial law for Lincoln County. By 1880, Billy the Kid was becoming notorious. The new territorial governor of New Mexico put a reward on his head. Sheriff Pat Garrett finally tracked him down on December 23, 1880. In April of 1881, the Kid shot down 2 deputies and escaped from the Lincoln County Jail on one of the most famous prison breaks in American history. Garrett tracked him down again on July 14, 1881. As Billy entered the home of a friend seeking food, he moved to the back bedroom. Billy was unaware that Garrett was in the house interrogating his friend. As Billy called out, Garrett claimed to recognize his voice and fired upon Billy, striking him in the chest. Billy the Kid was nothing more than a vengeful killer. Compared to Bonnie and Clyde, he seemed to be an erratic personality. This could come from his lack of stability as a child and the death of John Tunstall, who he seemed to see as a friend and person that he respected deeply. Another reason Billy's legacy endured is the scarcity of his actual photograph. To this day, there have been 2 verified Billy the Kid photos, one of which is arguably the most famous Western photo of all time. This small tintype photo features Billy standing upright in a shabby hat with a pistol on his belt and a rifle at his side. This photograph was sold at auction in 2011 for $2.3 million. Number 2, John Dillinger. John Dillinger was the face of the Public Enemy #1 era of American Outlaws. Dillinger not only was bold, but he looked like a celebrity. He put the face to this generation of outlaws. He was notorious for his efficient bank robberies, auto thefts, and escape. Before he even resorted to bank robbery, Dillinger was enlisted in the U.S. Navy and stationed on the USS Utah in 1923. Whilst the ship was docked in Boston, he deserted and was officially dishonorably discharged. Shortly after, he was arrested for assault and found himself in the Indiana State Prison System on a 10 to 20-year stint. It was in prison where he received a masterclass in criminality. Here, he learned the Herman Lamb system of bank robbery. Lamb was one of America's most prolific and successful bank robbers, and had perfected the science of robbery. It consisted of casing and preparing a robbery, including reconnaissance, getaway plans, and understanding each bank he robbed. Dillinger would use these techniques throughout his career, and in many ways become more prolific than Lamb. In 1933, he was released. A month later, he pulled off a $10,000 heist. After being arrested in Ohio, he was broken out of prison with a bold plan. 2 of his associates impersonated Indiana state officers, claiming to take Dillinger back to Indiana. The sheriff questioned the 2 criminals, and they shot the sheriff and escaped back to Indiana. One of the fascinating things about John Dillinger was his relationship with Billy Frechette. The 2 met in October of 1933. John Dillinger no doubt wooed her with his good looks and high roller status. He showered her with gifts. Soon after the relationship started, Frechette soon fell into the gang life with Dillinger's associates. She drove a getaway car after Dillinger had been shot by police. She said of Dillinger, quote, "John was good to me. He looked after me and bought me all kinds of jewelry and cars and pets, and we went places and saw things, and he gave me everything a girl wants. He treated me like a lady." Their relationship came to an abrupt end in 1934 when she was arrested. Dillinger watched as she was led away by police. He decided not to attack the lawmen, knowing he would likely be killed in the altercation. She would serve 2 years for harboring a fugitive and obstruction of justice. Dillinger by this time had become a household name. His good looks and suave demeanor set him apart from some of the other outlaws of this era. He had also been designated public enemy number 1 by the FBI, and a massive manhunt was on the way. Dillinger was living in Chicago at this time under relative anonymity. He had assumed an alias and was dabbling in plastic surgery to alter his appearance to escape the law. He would be betrayed by Anna Campanis, who was a brothel madam. She contacted the FBI and said she was associated with Dillinger. A scheme was hatched to try and bring in public enemy number 1. Her deal included a stipulation in which she would not be deported back to her native Romania in order to get him arrested. She would take him to the Biograph Theater and wear an orange dress. This would mark the couple for FBI agents waiting to take her down. As he left the theater, Dillinger looked directly at Agent Melvin Purvis and realized he was trapped. In the chaotic scene, Dillinger reached into his pocket for a gun but couldn't pull. He then ran down the alley. Dillinger was shot and hit from behind, landing face first on the pavement. Other accounts state that Dillinger was able to produce the gun, and therefore it was justified that he was shot down. He was so well known that bystanders swamped the alley and mopped up his blood and their handkerchiefs to have as a souvenir. Unfortunately, Anna Campanis, for her efforts, was still deported back to Romania. The reason I put Dillinger at number 2 is because he was considered the most dangerous criminal of his time, and was somewhat regarded as a hero. Bonnie and Clyde were derided because of their wanton murder sprees. Dillinger put forth the image of a dapper criminal, thus giving off a professional image, despite not being any better than the criminals of this era. Another reason he was considered public enemy number 1, a lofty title that immediately thrust his name into the spotlight. Some of Hollywood's best actors have portrayed the gangster, including Humphrey Bogart, Leo Gordon, and Johnny Depp. His body was put on display in the Cook County morgue, and it's estimated 15,000 people came through to view his body. Additionally, 4 death masks were made of his face. And the number 1 outlaw in American history is none other than Jesse James. Much like John Dillinger, Jesse James captured the hearts and minds of the country. James was a product of a war-torn society. He grew up fast as a member of the notorious Bloody Bill Anderson and William Control's guerrilla war bands known as the Bushwhackers in Missouri during the Civil War. One of the most important moments in James' early escapades was his participation in the Centralia Massacre. William Anderson's Bushwhackers captured 24 Union soldiers. James was among those that executed them during the ordeal. When the war ended with the Confederate surrender at Appomattox, Jesse James was still in Missouri, but did not lay down his arms. What happened over the next 15 years would cement Jesse James as America's most notorious outlaw. His life of crime began in 1866. Shortly after the war ended, he was credited with robbing the Clay County Savings in Liberty, Missouri. The bank was specifically targeted due to its owners being former pro-Union militia officers. Some historians think that Jesse was not even present at this robbery because he was recovering from gunshot wounds at the time. However, it is believed he was directly involved with the freeing from jail of 2 of Quantrill's former bushwhackers from jail. It's also believed that he was continuing the Civil War in his own way. In 1869, he was labeled an outlaw by Missouri Governor Thomas Crittenden. At this time, James began communication with John Edwards of the Kansas City Times. James sent Edwards multiple letters discussing his innocence in the robberies that were committed. Edwards would publish these letters in the paper, allowing James to directly speak to the people of Missouri in a way. As the letters came in, they began to become more and more political, as Jesse James would opine on his pro-Confederate ideology. Edwards would add his editorial flair and would further mythologize James as a hero amongst the anti-Republican and anti-Union sentiments still simmering in Missouri. His main targets were banks, stages, and train robberies. He would stake out payroll trains and come away with big scores along the way. The James Gang also had a network of family and associates willing to hide them. As the original members of the James Gang fell away, new members were added. Many came from the backwaters of Kentucky and Missouri and were not the regular hardened former bushwhackers. This caused a problem for Jesse James. He began to lose trust in many of the members of the gang. Several were killed, arrested, or began to talk to the authorities. Ultimately, James was killed by brothers Charlie and Robert Ford, and honestly, this story could be told in an entire video in and of itself. Basically, the governor of Missouri made a deal with Charlie and Robert Ford that if they were able to bring James in, they would be pardoned for the crimes they committed, and they would collect the wanted money. According to legend, Robert Ford shot Jesse James in the back of the head as James was adjusting an off-centered picture on the wall of his home. After his death, James's body was displayed for photographs and people filtered in to see the fallen outlaw. Over his career, it is believed James and his gang were responsible for 17 murders and stole over $200,000. James's legacy as an outlaw and anti-hero persists to this day. From a cultural perspective, his media manipulation and presence allowed him to cultivate his own image. Additionally, he was active in one of the most politically fragile times in American history. Each of these outlaws and gangs were different in their own ways. However, the one thing that binds them together, aside from their brutality and criminal escapades, was their infamy. All were infamous at their times, and are still some of those most recognized names in all of American history. I want to thank you so much for watching this episode from Everything Has History. Do you agree with my list? Let me know in the comments who you would take off or who would you put on. I would love to have a discussion on this interesting topic. Also, please share this video, like, and subscribe to Everything Has History. And with that, I'll see you on the next episode from Everything Has History.